Great Ideas is a program devoted to uncovering the meaning of the ideas we all use every day of our lives. In the period to follow, Dr. Mortimer J. Adler will undertake to discuss some aspect of a basic idea. Dr. Adler.
Mr. Luckman and I welcome you to another discussion of the great ideas. Today, we begin the discussion of the great idea, love. And we shall deal with this idea in successive weeks under 4 main headings. The headings are, first, the kinds of love. Second, love as friendship. Third, sexual love. And fourth, the morality of love. Now, under this first heading, the kinds of love, we are concerned with these questions. Are love and desire the same? Or are they distinct? Does love exist in separation from desire? Desire in separation from love? Is love ever born of desire? Or desire of love?
Dr. Adler.
Yes.
I have another question. It may be a bit off the point, but may I ask it?
Please.
Well, last week while I was discussing this problem with some people, they were a little bit puzzled about the idea of love and reference to love as an idea. You see, they rather think of love as something to be experienced or something that you feel or suffer rather than an idea. Now, if they don't want to think about it, how do you answer this?
Well, Mr. Luckman, it seems to me that love is both. After all, taxes are something you pay and suffer and complain about, but you can also think about taxes. People have written theories of taxation. The same thing is true of love. There's a theory of love. I think the great books show this extremely significantly. There are 2 kinds of great books about love. On the one hand, there are the theoretical or analytical books written by the scientists and the philosophers. On the other hand, there are the stories of love and lovers written by the poets and the historians, and it's these books, these latter books, which contain the experience, or shall I say, the vicarious experience of love. Now let me illustrate this by going to the poets. Let me illustrate this by going to the poets and taking from them examples of love or of lovers, famous examples. I've made a list of such examples, and I'd like to begin with one you all know, the love of Paris and Helen. You remember, Paris came from Troy, visited King Menelaus, and stole his wife away, Helen, took her back to Troy, and she became famous as Helen of Troy. Here is a picture. Here is a picture of the abduction of Helen by Paris. And that story of the abduction of Helen reminds us all, of course, of the Trojan War. And the Trojan War, as told in the great epic by Homer, the Iliad, gives us another picture of love, the love of Achilles, that great Greek warrior who loved himself so much, so proud, that he sulked in his tent during most of the 9 years of the war, until his dear friend Patroclus, whom he loved dearly, was killed by Hector in battle. Then that love overcame his great love for himself, his hurt pride, and he went forth, did battle with Hector, and avenged Patroclus. Well, let's compare these loves. the love of Paris and Helen, or of Achilles and Patroclus, with some other loves. The love, for example, of Romeo and Juliet. Let me show you a picture. Here is the death scene. Nothing could keep Romeo and Juliet apart, not even at the moment of death. Romeo has before this moment said to Juliet, "My bounty is as boundless as the sea, my love as deep. The more I give to thee, the more I have, for both are infinite." Now compare that love, the love of Romeo and Juliet, with the love of Dante for Beatrice. The story as we have it, the legend as we have it, is that Dante met Beatrice only once in his life. And here, in this picture, is the scene of that meeting. And having met her only once, he loved her forevermore, idealized her, almost reverenced her. Compare Dante's love for Beatrice with two other loves. The love of Othello for Desdemona. Here in this picture is the scene of the betrothal of Othello the Moor to Desdemona. And this love, beginning with this marriage, ends, as you know, in the tragic fate of Desdemona. For in a fit of absolutely insane jealousy, the insane jealousy of love, Othello kills her. And as he kills her, confesses to the world that he loved too wisely, but not well. I misstated that. He loved her not wisely, but too well. Compare these loves, the love of Romeo and Juliet, the love of Othello and Desdemona, with still another love, the love of Cordelia, the one good daughter of King Lear, for her father. Here is a picture of Cordelia and King Lear. This love of a good child for a parent, is certainly a different kind of love. And as you think of this kind of love, think also of the love of patriots for their country, men who die, lay down their lives for their country. Or think again of the love of Christian martyrs, the martyrs who, for the love of Christ, or for their faith in God and the love that goes with it, allowed themselves to be thrown to the lions in the arenas of Rome.
Dr. Adler.
Yes.
You recall that you said a moment ago that we're concerned today with the difference between love and desire. And then you presented us with some case materials, examples of famous loves and famous lovers. Now, are all these examples of love, or some examples of desire as opposed to love?
They are all love. Mr. Luckman, they are all love, but they are not all love of the same kind. The main difference, as a matter of fact, in these kinds of love that I have just more or less exemplified, turns on their relation to desire. And perhaps the best way I can explain, or begin to explain, this difference in kinds of love is to state for you briefly the striking distinction between two different theories of love. One theory which identifies love with desire, and one theory which admits that some love may be like desire or close to it, but that there's another kind of love distinct and separate from it. The first theory, the theory which everyone, I think, has some knowledge of, is a theory which says that love is desire, or that love has its root in desire. To love is to desire, and according to this theory, all love is erotic or carnal or sexual love. In the ancient world, one finds evidence of this conception of love in the common mythology of both Greece and Rome. You all know who the goddess of love was. She was Venus. And what you know of Venus tells you that she represented not any love, but sexual love, love between man and woman. It is a significant fact that Venus's son, Cupid, is called Cupid, for that name indicates the character of Venus. Cupid, the word Cupid, the name Cupid comes from the Latin word cupiditas, from which we get the English cupidity, which means intense desire. This mythological fact shows how the ancients thought of love as rooted in intense desire. Let me turn for the moment to another evidence of this same fact. Lucretius, a great Roman poet, felt that Venus and the love that she represented was a terrifying thing, that men would do well to avoid it. For if all of all the things that might plague men, this kind of love, most of all, destroyed their peace of mind. Let me turn in the Syntopicon to the words of Lucretius on this subject in his most famous passage, in which he issues forth a great invective, a diatribe against love. My glasses on. Lucretius says, Venus should be entirely shunned, for once her darts have wounded men, the sore gains strength and festers by feeding. Day by day, the madness grows, and the misery becomes heavier. This is the one thing whereof the more we have, the more does our heart burn with the cursed desire. When the gathering desire is sated, the old frenzy is back upon them. And he concludes by saying, to avoid being drawn into the meshes of love is not so hard a task as, when caught amidst the toils, to issue out and break through the strong bonds of Venus. Now, this conception of love runs through the whole tradition of modern science, especially modern psychology. One finds the beginning of it in a work in the 17th century by the physicist Gilbert, who wrote the first book on magnetism. In this book on magnetism, Gilbert speaks of the love of the iron for the lodestone, the love of the iron filings for the magnet. Let me just show you what Gilbert had in mind. Here are some iron filings. And if I hold the paper there and then hold the magnet, see what happens. See what happens to the iron filings. They are caught by the magnet and drawn after it, pulled, as it were, by the most intense line of force, attracted by the motion of the magnet. Now, what is interesting about that is the comment that some centuries later William James makes, a comment that, by the way, connects the iron filings in the magnet with the picture of Romeo and Juliet we saw a moment back. William James says, Romeo wants Juliet as the filings want the magnet, and if no obstacles intervene, he moves towards her by as straight a line as they. But Romeo and Juliet, if a wall be built between them, do not remain idiotically pressing their faces against its opposite sides, as in fact the iron filings do, pursuing the magnet. Finally, of course, as you all know, this conception of love is epitomized by Sigmund Freud. Freud's theory is that all love is sexual love, or sublimations of sexual love. Let me state this for you in Freud's own words, another passage that I have here in the Syntopicon. Freud says, the nucleus of what we mean by love consists in sexual love, with sexual union as its aim. We do not separate from this, on the one hand, self-love, and on the other hand, love for parents or children, friendship and love for humanity in general, and also devotion to abstract ideas. All these tendencies, according to Freud, are expressions of the same instinctive drive, the instinctive drives of sex. Now, let me return to the second theory of love. Second theory of love, which holds that surely some love is sexual love, but there are other kinds of love that are distinct from sex and separated from sexual desire. One finds this theory expressed in Aristotle's chapters or books on friendship in the Ethics, where he recognizes that some kinds of friendship are based upon desire, but he says quite plainly, these kinds of friendship are not true love. I shall deal more fully with this distinction of Aristotle's next week. But I do want to say right now that the way he exemplifies true love as opposed to a friendship based upon desire is in terms of the love of parents for children or the love of patriots for their country. As a matter of fact, if any of you think of what a patriot does when he lays down his life for his country, you will see an example of love that is quite distinct from sexual love or erotic love rooted in desire. Or one other thing, think of the love of God, the love which is called Christian love. Think, for example, of the words that one knows from the Gospel according to St. John, where St. John says, God is love, and he that dwelleth in love dwelleth in God, and God in him. Or one more thing, think of the law of love, which is the Christian law of love, the two precepts of charity. The first being, love God with all thy heart and all thy soul. The second being, love thy neighbor as thyself.
You know, Dr. Adler, as I've been listening to you, I've been wondering why you use the same word for all those things that are so very different. Isn't that really the cause of the confusion? I think if you use different names for different things, maybe we'd recognize that we have more than one idea here, maybe 2 or 3 ideas instead of one.
Well, it seems to me that the matter of words doesn't solve it, but the matter of words, the names of love, is interesting. Let me show you in a chart how the Greeks had 3 names and the Romans had 3 names for the distinct or different kinds of love. In Greek, there is the word eros, which means erotic love. The English word erotic comes from that. And the second kind of love in Greek is called philia. This is the word which has its root, is the root of words like philanthropy or philosophy, the love of mankind or the love of wisdom. And the third word in Greek is agape. And going to the Latin and translating now, the Latin equivalent of agape is caritas, from which we get the English charity, which means the love of God, as agape does in the Greek. And the Latin equivalent of philia is amicitia, which means friendly love. We get the word amicable in English. And the Latin equivalent of eros is the word amor, which of course we use when we say that young people are amorous. They are erotically in love. Now we don't have 3 words in English, but what we have to do in English is to name the different kinds of love by using phrases. And so we name these 3 kinds of love by saying erotic, carnal, or sexual love is the first kind. And the second kind is friendly, fraternal, or benevolent love. And the third kind is charitable or divine love. But the naming of the different kinds of love doesn't solve the problem. In fact, it only calls our attention to the problem. The problem, as I understand it, is how are these different kinds of love related to one another? How do they differ? How particularly does the first kind of love, erotic, carnal, or sexual love, differ from the other 2? And even the more difficult question, if they differ, how are they all the same, essentially the same as kinds of love, even though they are different kinds of love? Now, this is a hard problem. And I would like to propose to you a way of solving it. I'd like to propose to you an experiment in thinking about love. The experiment requires you to construct with me an imaginary world, a world without sex in it, a world without gender, without male or female, without the normal processes of reproduction, a world which everything else would be the same without sex, or perhaps not quite the same, since a good deal of advertising probably would be different, but a world without sex which we then can contrast with the real world in which we live in order to see and understand a little better how love is distinct from and separate from desire. Now, let me proceed at once to ask you, even though it puts a little strain on your imagination, to construct right now in your minds a world without sex. In that world, ask yourself, would there be desire in that world? Would desire exist in that world? Would there be love in that world? And if there would be both love and desire in that world, would they be distinct? Let me answer the first question. Would there be desire in that world without sex? Of course there would. Men would be hungry, thirsty, cold, tired. They would have the emotions or the passions of rage and fear, which are desires. And we can see in terms of these desires what desire is like. Let me take hunger. Hunger, which seems to me always to be the prototype of all the bodily desires. When a man is hungry, the first thing we notice is that he's empty. He lacks something. He is in need of something, deep need of something, because of an emptiness or lack in himself. And this drives him toward some object like food, which can fill him up, actually fill up the emptiness in him. The object of his desire satisfies him only when it actually is incorporated in him and fills him up. And this object of desire, which fills him up when he is empty, is something which he consumes or uses. Now, when you understand that this is the nature of desire, particularly bodily desire, of which hunger is the obvious prototype, you also understand why we do not say that God is desire. We say God is love. God could not be desire. God could not have desire, for only things that are wanting, only things that are imperfect or in need can desire. And you also understand why we think that no one should desire a person, for that which is the object of such desires is a thing to be used, and one shouldn't use a person. Let me turn to the second question and the third question. In this world, this imaginary world without sex, will there be love, as well as such bodily desires as hunger and thirst and cold and such things? Yes, there would be. In this world without sex, wouldn't there be love between parents and children? Wouldn't there be the love of friends? Wouldn't there be patriots who would love their country and die for it? And wouldn't there be religious martyrs or deeply religious persons whose love of God would govern their actions? And certainly when you understand love and desire in this imaginary world without sex, you can see that they are distinct. You can see that they are distinct. And now that you see they are distinct, perhaps we can go a little further in trying to understand how they differ. I think I can show you that difference in a chart. Let's look at the top of this chart. The chart says that love is to desire as liking is to wanting, as giving is to getting. And that means, if you understand that love is fundamentally altruistic and generous, whereas desire is fundamentally selfish and acquisitive.
No, I think I understand the difference that you've indicated in this chart, Dr. Adler. For example, I can see now that patriotism is quite different from a desire like hunger. But isn't there another sort of desire which is associated with a kind of love that is pure friendship? I think in terms of purely philanthropic love.
I think there is. Let me repeat Mr. Luckman's question, because it's a very good question. He asks whether, in addition to bodily desires like hunger and thirst, there is something like a desire that is associated with, perhaps even arises from, springs from, the kind of love I've been talking about, which is distinct from bodily desires. The answer to that question is yes, there is. Still in this imaginary world, this world you're imagining with me, a world without sex, one can see that love leads men to do things for other men. When you love a person, you wish that other person well. You want to benefit or help that other person. You want to do good to that other person. That's a desire, only unlike the selfish desires of things like hunger, this desire or wish of love is a benevolent impulse. This is the meaning, I take it, of what everyone understands when he says, greater love than this hath no man, that he is willing to lay down his life for his friend. And the contrast here, the sharp contrast here between bodily desires and the wish of love is a contrast in direction. Bodily desires are acquisitive. They are instances in which I try to benefit myself, improve myself, make up for my own lacks or needs. Whereas the wish of love is to benefit the other, to improve the other. Now let me see if I can apply this insight for you by one clear case. What do we mean when we say, as we so often do, that children should be loved? That children thrive on being loved? That being loved is the most essential ingredient in the rearing of children? What do we mean by that? I think we mean that it is necessary for children to be admired and respected, that they should receive courtesy on the part of the adult world and consideration, and that only through such care and consideration do they grow properly to have proper self-respect. In this sense, the tenderness, the care and consideration given a child is almost its spiritual nourishment. And you can reverse this. Think now of what some people call the fourth commandment and what others call the fifth commandment. Commandment is, thou shalt honor thy father and thy mother. It doesn't say love, but what does honor mean? As I understand this commandment, be it fourth or fifth, it is that children should respect their parents, show them courtesy, consideration, act with goodwill toward them. Now, this is, I think, a beginning of the discussion of love. We shall go on from here in the next two discussions. Next time, I hope we can achieve a much fuller understanding of the love we began to talk about today. The love between friends, the love of parents and children, the love of patriots for their country, or of martyrs for their God. And then, in the time after that, in the discussion to follow, I hope we can turn our attention to the other kind of love and give it more full attention, the kind of love I have called sexual, or erotic, or carnal love. That kind of love which, in the real world, not the imaginary world, exists side by side and is so often fused with a love which is separate and distinct from sex or desire, the love of friendship. I hope this subject interests you as much as it does me, and I hope you will be with us in these successive weeks as we carry on this consideration, this examination, this discussion of the great idea of love. Thank you very much.